5,000 people have died so far due to gas exposure-related illnesses. More than 572,000 people stand exposed. More than 100,000 people chronically sick. And more than 30,000 people who continue to drink contaminated water. And these two girls come from those communities. These are not just merely numbers. There are people behind all these numbers. There's someone's son, there's someone's daughters, someone's mother. But, you know, all of this happened. The biggest industrial disaster, the biggest tragedy the world has ever seen in terms of human lives. Yet, the people and the corporations responsible for it have not faced a single day of jail, have not faced any punishment. The corporations still continue to make profit and push their million-dollar propaganda on how they're innocent. The governments are too busy, both American and Indian, colluding with the corporations and being in the pocket of the corporations. And, you know, mostly people have forgotten, you know, it was the wrong class of people that are affected. It was the poor people who were affected. It was people from the unorganized sector. It was a lot of Muslims, you know. Very few people hear about those kind of people. So we have come here basically to talk about how this disaster still continues and how we feel that there is a lot of hope. This story is not just about despair, but it is also about hope, and it's also about setting precedents. That corporations cannot come, kill, and pollute and lead without any kind of legal or ethical or moral responsibility. And that's why the struggle still continues in Bhopal. And anything that people in Bhopal have gotten, whether it is little compensation, little medical care, little economic rehabilitation, or putting pressure on the company, it's because they have decided not to tolerate these injustices. They have decided to walk long marches for 850 kilometers, which had taken them 37 days to walk. They had decided to go on hunger fast. They were beaten, they were jailed. And this has gone on for last, 25 years. I want to talk a little bit about the history of how this happened and not dwell so much about it and talk about how we can go forward. But this was definitely not an accident. This was an accident in making. There were several things on the night of the disaster that were not working, and most of them were just to save some money. We are fighting a case against Union Carbide in New York District Court, where we have enough proof to say that there was prior knowledge about the disaster. You saw the engineer who testified. There were 2 journalists who predicted the disaster. Then now we have come across documents in this court case, which basically says that Union Carbide back in 1981, 3 years before the disaster, knew the way they were dumping all their toxic waste was going to cause water contamination. And 25 years later, we have hundreds and thousands of children being born with all sorts of birth defects. So this they knew back in 1981. Then another interesting story I want to tell, that how it has been always Union Carbide's policy to minimize the disaster. Right after the disaster in 1984, Union Carbide, on the night of the disaster, when the doctors from the hospitals were calling to ask them, what should we give people, because there are so many people coming in with breathlessness, they are dying, what should we give? What is the antidote? What will make them feel better? Union Carbide's response was, it is just like tear gas, so it is just affecting their eyes and lungs. Just give them water and they will feel better. That's all that doctors from Bhopal could get out of Union Carbide. A week later, a German scientist came, Max Donner, and he basically said that if sodium thiosulfate was injected to people who were exposed to MIC, methyl isocyanates, it would make them feel better because it would detoxify. Basically, MIC would come out of their urine. And Union Carbide Corporation USA also sent out a memo saying that yes, sodium thiosulfate should be given to people. So all the clinics in the Bhopal, private, public, and even small charity clinics, because there were so many people who had come from all over the world to help, they started administering sodium thiosulfate. 2 weeks later, another memo came from Union Carbide Corporation basically saying that we do not believe in the efficacy of sodium thiosulfate and it should be stopped immediately. Union of India issued a memo saying that anyone who wants to administer sodium thiosulfate injections should do so at their own risk. So almost all private bodies and all government bodies stopped, except one clinic. And people who were administering this were seeing huge results, because as people, they would get injections for 7 days, and as they went along, they were feeling better, they would measure their pulse, they would measure their respiration, and people were having good vital signs. They were responding to this. But all of them were stopped, except this one clinic who functioned. This was a clinic that my colleague used to run. And 20 days later, they were all jailed, all beaten, jailed for 18 days and all the records sealed. And no one could understand at that time why this was happening. I mean, we had this hunch. But because of what we have been fighting in New York, we have got access to papers which basically says that Union Carbide Corporation was in constant consultation with their lawyers. And the lawyers said, if you are going to agree to the efficacy of sodium thiosulfate, that means you are saying that the poison has gone into the bloodstream. Because if you're detoxifying through urine, that means it is in your blood, right? So if it is in your blood, that means it has impacted every single part of your body. And every single part of your body, it could have effect on the next generation, the third generation, and so forth and so forth. So the liability of the company is not just about a tear gas effect like damages. It's not just damages for one-time exposure, right? So the liability of the company goes up tremendously. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars of settlement, right? So there was a consultation that happened between Union Carbide and its lawyers, which advised them that they should not agree on the efficacy of sodium thiosulfate. And the Indian government colluded with that, and the settlement that happened in 1989, it was a $470 million. This was a settlement that was proposed to be $3.3 billion, and it was reduced to that, and it came out to basically $500 for lifetime injuries and $1,000 for a death in a family. And absolutely, no talk about second generation, no talk about third generation. And another disaster that continues to happen in Bhopal is that of water contamination. Union Carbide left all this toxic waste behind and didn't tell anyone, didn't tell the government, didn't tell the people who were living there, and just abandoned the factory, even though they knew much earlier that the water was going to be contaminated. And slowly, all that toxic waste started seeping into the groundwater, and it has contaminated the water of more than 30,000 people. There are organic VOCs, we are finding heavy metals, all sorts of chemicals that cause damage to kidneys, brain, birth defects. There is mercury found in mother's breast milk. So Union Carbide had prior knowledge, and after having prior knowledge, they did everything they could do to minimize the impact of the disaster. And Government of India colluded on the night of the disaster while everyone was busy helping people who were sick and who were dying. Government of Madhya Pradesh was busy disposing dead bodies in the jungles or in the Narmada River to minimize the impact of the disaster. Even in 1989 settlement, there is ample proof that the judge who ruled in favor of Union Carbide Corporation in the settlement amount that was so little, even though there were massive protests by the Bhopal gas victims, because Government of India called themselves that they would represent the interest of Bhopal gas victims without consulting a single gas victim, and therefore negotiated such a stupid settlement. Even though there is proof that the judge who was involved in ruling in favor of Union Carbide was basically promoted to the International Court of Justice after that, giving that favorable judgment. And Union Carbide made transfers into his Swiss bank account. And now we are basically dealing with another big chemical corporation, which is Dow Chemical Company. In 2001, Dow Chemical basically bought over Union Carbide. And since they have bought that over, they basically say that we have taken all the assets of Union Carbide. When it comes to the liabilities of Union Carbide, we have nothing to do with it. That means only the liabilities of Union Carbide in India, they will not take care of, because when it comes to Union Carbide's liabilities in United States, they paid 12 workers who were exposed to Union Carbide's asbestos